The night was quiet, eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But inside the walls of one of the most scrutinized residences in the world, tension was erupting like a storm that had been quietly brewing for years. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, sat alone in his private study, staring at a piece of information that had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and the woman he once called his wife. You may be wondering, what could possibly provoke such a reaction? What could make a man, known for his loyalty, compassion, and public composure, reach for his phone and demand the presence of his divorce lawyers in the middle of the night? The answer is as shocking as it is devastating, and it's a story that has remained hidden until now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For months, rumors had swirled around the couple. Headlines screamed about alleged tensions, secret disagreements, and supposed attempts at reconciliation. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared the world, or even Harry himself, for what he discovered. It wasn't just a disagreement, an argument, or even a betrayal in the way most people understand it. This was something so fundamentally destabilizing that it forced Harry to take immediate, irreversible action. Imagine discovering that the person you've trusted, loved, and built a life with was no longer the same person, or worse, that the life you were living had been built on layers of deception. How would you react? What would you do if you realized that the world you believed in was only a facade? Harry's reaction was swift, decisive, and unprecedented. Within hours, he had contacted his legal team, instructing them to begin the process of severing every possible tie to Meghan Markle. Not just legally, but emotionally, publicly, and symbolically. He wanted the world to understand that this was no ordinary separation. This was a complete and absolute severing of ties. And make no mistake, the implications of this decision are seismic, not only for the couple, but for the royal family, for the media, and for the millions of people around the globe who have followed their story for over a decade. But let's rewind for a moment. Why now? Why at this moment, after years of speculation, public appearances, and media spin? The answer lies in the shocking discovery itself, a revelation so explosive that it forced Harry to confront reality in a way he never had before. It's the kind of discovery that keeps you awake at night, that makes you question every interaction, every memory, every word you've been told. And it's exactly what set the stage for the chain reaction that would follow. Calls to lawyers, private meetings with advisors, and the kind of decisions that could alter the public perception of the monarchy forever. And yet, even in this moment of shock and betrayal, Harry's mind raced. How would the public react? How would the media cover this? And perhaps most importantly, how would Meghan respond? Because in a story like this, nothing is ever one-sided. Every revelation, every action, every decision triggers a response, and Harry knew that the next moves in this chess game would be critical. He was prepared to act decisively, but he also understood the stakes. His reputation, his legacy, and the safety and perception of his family were all on the line. It's easy to forget, amidst the glitz, glamour, and headlines, that behind every royal scandal there is a deeply human story. This isn't just about titles, palaces, or public appearances. This is about trust, loyalty, love, and betrayal. It's about the intense scrutiny that comes with being a member of the royal family, where every action is dissected, every word analyzed, and every mistake amplified 1,000-fold. For Harry, this discovery wasn't just a personal shock, it was a public catastrophe waiting to happen. And the implications? They are staggering. Because once a royal decides to act, the ripple effects are felt across continents. Advisors whisper in corridors, legal teams scramble, tabloids prepare explosive headlines, and the public watches every move with bated breath. This is the kind of situation where every detail matters, where every second counts, and where one wrong move can set off a cascade of consequences that are impossible to reverse. Harry was acutely aware of this. Every decision, every phone call, every meeting would have to be calculated, precise, and unflinching. But what exactly did Harry discover? That's the million-dollar question, the one that has kept the world guessing for weeks. Was it a financial revelation, a personal betrayal, or something even more shocking that cut to the core of their relationship? While we can't reveal every detail just yet, the magnitude of the discovery was enough to redefine the terms of their relationship entirely. This wasn't a disagreement or a temporary conflict. It was a fundamental rupture, one that left Harry no choice but to act immediately. And so, in the dead of night, surrounded by the quiet hum of his residence, Harry made the call that would change everything. He contacted his lawyers, outlining his intentions, specifying the scope of severance, and demanding that every tie, emotional, legal, and public, be cut. This was not a decision made lightly. This was the culmination of years of tension, doubt, and hidden truths finally colliding with reality. The gravity of the moment was not lost on him, nor would it be lost on anyone watching from the outside. The question now is, what happens next? Because in a story this explosive, the first action is never the last. Every revelation triggers another, every decision prompts a reaction, and every move is scrutinized, dissected, and debated. The world is watching, waiting to see how Meghan responds, how the royal family adapts, and what consequences will ripple across the globe. And one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same again. So, buckle up, because this is not just a story of personal betrayal. It's a story of power, legacy, and one of the most shocking royal crises of our time. As we unravel the events that led Harry to make this unprecedented decision, you will see behind the carefully curated public image, into the private moments of tension, and into the hidden decisions that changed everything. From shocking discoveries to legal maneuvers, from emotional breakdowns to strategic countermoves, this story has it all. It started as an ordinary evening, or at least, that's what anyone looking from the outside would have thought. The sky was dark, the London streets quiet, and the palace corridors eerily still. But inside one of the most private wings, a storm was quietly gathering. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, sat in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. In his hands, a piece of information glared back at him like a warning he could not ignore. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves knew the gravity of what was about to unfold. Have you ever had a moment in your life when everything you believed to be true suddenly evaporates? A moment when trust, love, and certainty collapse into chaos? That is exactly where Harry found himself that night. It wasn't an argument, a scandal, or even a miscommunication. It was something so profound, so fundamentally shocking, that it shattered the very foundation of his life. The call he would make in the coming hours would set in motion events no one could have predicted, and it all began with this one private realization. Harry's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. It wasn't fear that gripped him, it was clarity. In that moment, he knew he had a decision to make, a line to draw, and consequences he could not yet see in full. He dialed the number he had memorized months ago, but had hoped never to use. The lawyers who answered were calm, professional, unaware of the storm brewing just on the other side of the line. "Hello." The voice was steady, but Harry's reply was anything but ordinary. "I need you. Now. It's urgent. No pleasantries. No hesitation. Just urgency, raw and unfiltered." And with those words, the gears of a process that would shake not only a marriage but a global institution began to turn. The thing about a private revelation of this magnitude is that it doesn't just affect the person who discovers it. It ripples outward, touching everyone in its orbit. One truth, one realization, can unsettle decades of carefully maintained images, narratives, and alliances. Harry understood this. He had been living under the constant gaze of the world, each moment scrutinized, each move dissected. But now, the scrutiny was internal, intimate, and unavoidable. How do you confront a truth that forces you to reconsider everything, especially when that truth involves the person you once vowed to spend your life with? As he sat there, waiting for his legal team to mobilize, Harry's mind raced through memories, conversations, and moments that now took on a different, almost sinister hue. The laughter, the vacations, the quiet evenings by the fire, they all felt different. He began to wonder. Had he ever truly known the woman beside him, or had he been living a carefully curated illusion? The realization was painful, not just because of what it revealed about Meghan Markle, but because of what it revealed about himself and the life they had built together. At that precise moment, a silence filled the room. A silence so dense it felt almost tangible. Harry took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. But it was impossible. Every instinct screamed that something had changed irreversibly. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. One call, one instruction, could alter the course of his life forever. And so he made it. The phone call that would set this drama into motion was placed with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing for this moment, even if they didn't realize it. The lawyers on the other end were briefed on secrecy, immediacy, and absolute discretion. Harry didn't want leaks, rumors, or half-truths. He wanted action, clarity, and results. And in the royal world, where appearances are everything, that is no small feat. But the call was just the beginning. Because revelations of this kind do not exist in a vacuum. They provoke reaction. They demand response. And Harry, despite his composed exterior, could already sense the dominoes beginning to tip. He knew the palace would soon be aware, the advisors would scramble, and the media. Oh, the media would descend with the speed of a hurricane. How do you navigate such a storm when every move is watched, every word analyzed, and every action carries historical weight? The hours that followed were a blur. Meetings were scheduled in secret rooms, documents were prepared, and messages were sent with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Harry's legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that every base was covered, that every potential loophole was accounted for, and that the process of severing ties could proceed as swiftly and efficiently as possible. And yet, even in this whirlwind of preparation, the human element could not be ignored. Harry's emotions were raw, a mixture of grief, anger, disbelief, and determination. This wasn't just a legal process. This was personal, deeply, painfully personal. And amidst all of this, Harry's mind could not stop returning to the pivotal question. How had it come to this? What had led to this moment where a prince of the United Kingdom, a man accustomed to protocol, tradition, and public scrutiny, found himself on the brink of completely severing ties with his wife? The answer, as he would come to realize, lay not in a single moment, but in a series of actions, words, and hidden truths that had accumulated over years. Small discrepancies, overlooked signs, and subtle manipulations that, in isolation, might have seemed insignificant, now coalesced into a pattern that could not be ignored. For the outside world, the drama may have seemed sudden, but for Harry, it had been a slow, almost imperceptible unraveling that reached its climax in that private study, with the night pressing against the windows and the weight of revelation pressing on his chest. This was the moment when a life built on trust, loyalty, and love collided with truth, consequence, and irreversible action. As the night deepened, Harry paused to reflect. Could he have acted differently? Could he have confronted the issues sooner? Or was this discovery always going to force his hand? Questions like these circled endlessly in his mind, without answers, without relief. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thing was clear: there was no turning back. The process had begun, and the decisions he made now would echo for years, shaping not just his own life, but the legacy of the royal family and the perception of the public. And just as he was about to leave the study, one final thought hit him like a thunderclap. This discovery, this revelation, was only the beginning. What seemed like a private crisis was about to become a global spectacle. The implications stretched far beyond the walls of the palace, into the media, the public, and the very heart of the monarchy itself. Every move, every statement, every leak would be analyzed. Every rumor would be amplified, and the world would watch, waiting for the next explosive development. Harry knew that the hours ahead would define the narrative, the headlines, and perhaps even the public's understanding of his life and choices. But there was one undeniable truth that no one could ignore. Nothing would ever be the same again. The private call had been made. The lawyers had been alerted. And the first steps towards severing all ties had begun. And yet, as he looked at the moonlight filtering through the window, Harry could not shake the sense of foreboding. For every action taken, there would be a reaction. For every revelation, a consequence. And one of those consequences, he realized with chilling clarity, would come from a direction no one could have anticipated. The morning after the private call was quiet, deceptively quiet. Outside, London hummed along with its usual rhythm. unaware that inside one of its most iconic residences, a revelation was about to reshape the life of a prince. For Harry, however, there was no calm. Sleep had fled him entirely, replaced by a swirl of thoughts, questions, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. What he had discovered the night before was not something that could simply be ignored, brushed under the carpet, or rationalized away. It was seismic. The shocking discovery that had propelled him into action was, in truth, almost unbelievable. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. For months, for years even, Harry had trusted, loved, and defended Meghan Markle. He had stood by her in public, through media scrutiny, and in private moments that only they shared. He had believed in her sincerity, in her intentions, in the life they were building together. And now, that trust had been shattered. Suddenly, the picture he had built in his mind, a life of partnership, love, and mutual respect, was revealed to be incomplete, flawed, and, in some ways, deceptive. You might be asking yourself, what kind of discovery could provoke such a reaction? How could one revelation force a royal to immediately contact his legal team and initiate what could only be described as a formal divorce process? The answer is layered, intricate, and as dramatic as it is devastating. Without revealing every private detail, the essence of the shock lies in the complete redefinition of Harry's understanding of his marriage. What he had assumed was loyalty turned out to be conditional. What he believed to be transparency was layered with omission, and what he thought was unity now appeared fractured beyond repair. As the morning light poured into his study, Harry retraced every conversation, every private moment, every text message and email. Each one now seemed to carry a hidden meaning, a nuance he had previously missed. There were hints, subtle signals, and inconsistencies that, in hindsight, pointed toward the truth he had discovered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The foundation of his life had been quietly undermined. How could someone you loved so deeply hold back truths so significant that they could alter the trajectory of your life entirely? And yet, the evidence was clear. Documents, correspondence, and subtle cues all pointed in the same direction. It wasn't speculation or rumor. It was fact, something that Harry could verify, something that no one could reasonably dispute. This was a line crossed in the shadows, a reality hidden from public view, but painfully visible to him now. For anyone in his position, the weight of such a discovery is almost unbearable. The very act of processing it, trying to separate emotion from fact, reality from perception, is enough to unsettle even the most composed individual. Harry's first instinct, as it often had been in moments of crisis, was to act decisively. But the deeper, more complicated instinct was to understand, to make sense of how a life so carefully curated could conceal such profound truths. How could the public, who had cheered, sympathized, and celebrated with him, understand this private shock? And how could the palace, steeped in tradition, protocol, and public image, respond to a revelation that threatened to destabilize not only a marriage but a family, a legacy, and a global institution? Questions flooded Harry's mind. Had there been warnings all along, masked as ordinary disagreements or misunderstandings? Were there clues in subtle shifts of behavior, in late-night messages, in conversations that now seemed oddly rehearsed? He began to piece together a timeline, connecting dots that he had previously dismissed as coincidental or trivial. And as the connections formed, the scale of the discovery became horrifyingly clear. This was more than a marital conflict. This was a redefinition of identity, of relationships, of trust. The person Harry had thought he knew, truly knew, was no longer the person standing beside him in the public eye, or perhaps never had been. It's a chilling realization, one that goes beyond heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment. It's the kind of truth that leaves a permanent mark, a fracture in your understanding of reality that cannot simply be repaired. And yet, as much as Harry grappled with shock, confusion, and grief, there was also a practical side to the discovery that demanded immediate action. This wasn't just personal, it was public. The implications for legal ties, public perception, and financial arrangements were immense. The line between private heartbreak and public consequence blurred. Harry knew that delaying action, hesitating, or failing to respond decisively could result in outcomes far more damaging than the revelation itself. He reached out again, this time not for guidance, but for execution. The lawyers, briefed hours before, were ready to act. Documents were drafted, preliminary agreements considered, and the framework for what would become a formal separation, and eventually a complete severance of ties, was set in motion. But even as the legal gears began to turn, the emotional toll on Harry was inescapable. The weight of what he had discovered pressed on him from every angle: betrayal, confusion, public scrutiny, and the impossibility of returning to a previous state of trust. Amid this whirlwind, Harry began to anticipate the reactions around him. Meghan, of course, would have her response, whatever that might be. The royal family would be forced to intervene, navigate protocol, and manage optics. And yet, even in the face of all these practical and emotional considerations, the most pressing question remained: how could someone so close, so intimate in life, hold back truths so fundamentally important? How could a marriage, built on vows of loyalty and trust, be suddenly revealed to contain secrets of such magnitude? It is a question that has haunted Harry since that morning, a question that has no easy answer, and one that continues to resonate far beyond the walls of the palace. As Harry sat in contemplation, he realized that this discovery was not just a turning point, it was a beginning of a process that would not only redefine his marriage, but would also challenge the very foundations of the royal family, the public's understanding of him, and the narrative that had been carefully curated over years. Every action, every statement, and every decision from this point onward would be colored by this revelation, and every response would carry the weight of history. The shocking discovery had done more than reveal a truth. It had ignited a series of events that could not be undone. Harry understood, with a clarity born from both pain and necessity, that the next steps were critical. Delay, hesitation, or indecision could compound the consequences. And so, with the morning sun streaming through the windows, he prepared himself for the most decisive actions of his life. But just as he thought he had accounted for every possibility, every reaction, and every outcome, Harry realized something chilling. This discovery, as shocking as it was only the first layer. Beneath it lay even more revelations, secrets, and challenges waiting to emerge. And one of those hidden truths, still unseen, would push him further than he had ever imagined. The phone call was made with the precision of someone who knew that hesitation could cost everything. In the quiet of his study, Prince Harry felt the weight of every second, every word, every decision pressing down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just a call. It was a declaration, a pivot point, a public and private acknowledgement that the life he had known was over. Every instinct screamed urgency, and yet there was a meticulousness to his action that reflected both his upbringing and the gravity of the situation. "Get them on the line. Now," Harry said, his voice measured but unshakably firm. There was no room for doubt, no allowance for negotiation. The lawyers understood the seriousness immediately. They had been briefed on high-profile cases before, but nothing quite like this. A royal initiating a complete severance of ties with his spouse wasn't just a legal matter. It was a historical event, unprecedented in its public ramifications. Harry knew the stakes. This wasn't just about personal grievance or marital discord. Every decision, every clause, every stipulation carried implications for titles, public perception, financial arrangements, and the very reputation of the monarchy itself. The weight of centuries of protocol and tradition rested on his shoulders, yet the urgency of the moment demanded speed, decisiveness, and an uncompromising approach. He could not afford to wait. The lawyers listened intently as Harry outlined the situation. He spoke not just as a client, but as someone who had just uncovered truths that demanded immediate action. There were no ambiguities, no pleasantries, no room for delay. "This isn't a negotiation. This is final. I want all ties severed. Legal, public, and symbolic." Immediately, the words were sharp, cutting through the calm professionalism of the legal team and sending a jolt through the line. It's easy to forget, for those of us outside the royal sphere, that even members of the monarchy are subject to legal frameworks. Titles, estates, financial arrangements, and public duties are all intertwined with complex legal obligations. But Harry, having spent years navigating public scrutiny, private pressures, and media speculation, understood this framework better than most. He knew precisely which levers to pull, which documents to request, and how to protect both his public image and his personal interests. Still, even with all this preparation, the emotional gravity of the moment was inescapable. Every legal step carried an echo of personal betrayal. Every clause drafted was a reminder that the woman he had loved, trusted, and supported was no longer, in his eyes, the partner she once appeared to be. It is one thing to engage a lawyer for a standard divorce. It is another entirely to do so from a position of both public prominence and deep emotional upheaval, with every move destined to be scrutinized by millions. As the legal process began to unfold, Harry's mind oscillated between strategy and emotion. How would the palace react? What would Meghan do when she realized that the legal machinery had already started moving? And most pressing of all, how would the world perceive his actions? Public opinion, after all, could be both ally and adversary. Every headline, every social media post, every televised analysis had the power to reinforce or undermine the narrative he was trying to establish. The lawyers worked quickly, drafting letters, reviewing agreements, and preparing for every possible contingency. Harry insisted on precision, on absolute clarity, and on a pace that mirrored the urgency he felt. There was no room for error. One misstep could be amplified beyond control, one leaked detail could shape global headlines, and one overlooked clause could jeopardize the very objective of severing ties completely. And yet, amidst the flurry of legal activity, Harry's emotional state was impossible to ignore. It wasn't anger that drove him. It was a profound sense of betrayal, a shock so deep that it resonated in every corner of his being. He felt the collision of duty and heartbreak, of public expectation and private devastation. This was personal, yes, but it was also historical. Few could claim to have navigated such a delicate intersection of love, law, and legacy. The process was painstaking. Every conversation, every document, every decision had to be considered not only in isolation but in context. How it would be interpreted, what precedents it would set, and how it would resonate in both public and private spheres. Harry's attention to detail was exhaustive, bordering on obsessive. And yet, even as the logistics consumed him, the human element could not be ignored. Every step, every clause, every instruction was infused with the emotional reality of a man grappling with betrayal, heartbreak, and the need for closure. At the same time, there was strategy involved. Harry understood that a legal separation of this magnitude would provoke reactions not just from Meghan, but from the broader family, the palace, and the media. Each move had to be calculated, anticipating responses, countermoves, and potential leaks. He was not merely responding to a personal betrayal. He was navigating a storm with consequences that stretched far beyond his own life. And yet, even as the lawyers executed his instructions with precision, Harry could not escape the reality of the situation. This was more than legal paperwork. It was a definitive act, a symbolic severing, a declaration that the relationship as he had known it was no longer valid. The implications were profound. Titles, public duties, personal connections, and even family relationships were now subject to renegotiation in a context of both legal and emotional upheaval. As the day wore on, the weight of his decisions became tangible. Advisors whispered in corridors, assistants scurried to manage communications, and the palace itself began to sense the magnitude of the unfolding drama. Harry's legal team moved with quiet efficiency, aware that every step was historic. And yet, for all the professionalism, for all the careful planning, the human drama at the heart of it could not be contained. Every action taken, every document signed, every instruction given carried with it an emotional resonance that could not be ignored. Even now, as the process continued, Harry understood that this was only the beginning. The legal severance was a necessary step, but it would provoke reactions, responses, and revelations that he could not yet predict. Every move would be watched, every action dissected, every decision debated. The world was waiting, and Harry knew that the next moments would be decisive in shaping not only public perception but the narrative that would define his life for years to come. And then, just as the final agreements were being prepared, a thought struck him, one that sent a chill down his spine. The legal actions, the carefully drafted documents, the plans for severance, none of them accounted for what was coming next. Because in a story like this, the law can only do so much. Emotion, strategy, and unforeseen moves from Meghan herself could alter everything in an instant. And Harry knew, with a deep, instinctual certainty, that the most shocking developments were still waiting just beyond the horizon. Calling the divorce lawyers was not just a legal necessity. It was the first act in a drama that would unfold on a scale few could have imagined. The next moves, the counter-reactions, and the public spectacle that would inevitably follow were all part of a chain reaction set in motion by this single, decisive action. And yet, even as Harry took control of the situation, one question lingered in his mind. How would Meghan respond? The news did not reach Meghan Markle through tabloids, gossip, or the whispers of palace corridors. It reached her privately, in the quiet of a residence far from public scrutiny, where the weight of secrecy often felt heavier than the glare of cameras. For a moment, she paused, processing the fact that Prince Harry, the man she had married, loved, and shared her most intimate moments with, had taken a step that would change everything. A legal severance. A public and private declaration that their life together was no longer sustainable. Imagine the shock of receiving a message, a call, or a revelation that one of the most important people in your life had already begun to sever all ties. It's not anger at first, not confusion, not even sadness. It is disbelief. Pure, incomprehensible disbelief. Meghan had grown accustomed to navigating scrutiny, to managing appearances, to controlling narratives in public and private alike. And yet, in that instant, control slipped through her fingers like sand. She began replaying interactions in her mind. Moments that had seemed ordinary now felt like clues, subtle signs of a rift she had failed to notice or had chosen to ignore. Was it a look, a word, a hesitation? How had she missed the warning signs, the subtle indications that Harry was moving decisively, that he was ready to act? For anyone, this moment of realization can feel like the ground falling out from beneath your feet. For someone in Meghan's position, the stakes were infinitely higher. Every reaction had consequences that extended beyond personal grief. They rippled into the media, the monarchy, and public perception across the globe. Her first instinct was to respond. Meghan was no stranger to strategy, to influence, to careful maneuvering in high-pressure situations. But even strategy requires time, clarity, and understanding of what you are facing. And the reality was that Harry had acted swiftly, decisively, leaving her with only fragments of information and a rapidly closing window of response. In that quiet room, Meghan had to confront not just the fact of Harry's action, but the implications, titles, public image, private relationships, and the intricate web of legal consequences that had already begun to unfold. Anger, inevitably, followed disbelief. How could he make such a monumental decision without discussion, without warning, without even the faintest attempt at reconciliation? For years, Meghan had cultivated her own narrative, her own identity within the confines of royal life and public expectation. And now, that carefully constructed world was colliding violently with reality. It's one thing to experience betrayal in private life. It's another entirely when that betrayal is amplified by history, tradition, and the scrutiny of millions. But Meghan was nothing if not resourceful. She began strategizing even as the news settled like a weight on her chest. Every friend, advisor, and confidant who had been a part of her life in recent years suddenly became critical to navigate the storm. Private meetings, whispered calls, and subtle signals began to form a web of potential countermoves. Meghan understood the stakes. Every reaction, every statement, every hint of defiance or compliance could reshape not only the narrative surrounding her, but the trajectory of her public and personal life. And yet, amidst strategy and composure, emotion clawed its way in. For someone who had lived under constant scrutiny, who had built a persona that balanced strength, poise, and relatability, the personal hurt was unavoidable. Betrayal is not diminished by status, wealth, or influence. It cuts through the armor that public life often demands, revealing the raw, unfiltered reality beneath. For Meghan, this moment was both a crisis and a crucible, a test of resilience, cunning, and self-preservation. As the hours passed, Meghan's advisors began preparing for every possible scenario. Media management, public statements, legal countermeasures. All were analyzed with surgical precision. Every option was considered, every risk assessed. She had to anticipate the fallout, the public reaction, and Harry's potential next steps. But even with careful planning, one element remained unpredictable: human emotion. No amount of strategy could fully account for Harry's motives, his determination, or the revelations he now carried as a justification for his actions. And then came the first private communications between them. Short, terse messages that carried the weight of unspoken accusations, expectations, and tension. Each word was dissected, each tone analyzed. Meghan knew that Harry's silence could speak louder than any message. In high-stakes personal crises like this, what is unsaid often carries more weight than what is spoken. She began to understand that the severance of ties was not just a legal maneuver. It was a statement, an irrevocable declaration of autonomy, a boundary she had yet to navigate. As Meghan wrestled with her emotions and strategized her next moves, she was forced to confront a fundamental truth. The dynamics of their relationship had shifted irreversibly. The man she had called her partner, her confidant, her husband, had changed his approach, set his boundaries, and made his position crystal clear. This wasn't negotiation. This wasn't a moment of reconciliation. This was a pivot, a dramatic, decisive, and shocking pivot that demanded a response she had not anticipated. Even in isolation, Meghan was aware that the palace, advisors, and the global public would soon become aware of the rupture. Every subtle decision, every delayed message, every nuanced interaction would be scrutinized. The stakes were enormous, and missteps could have consequences far beyond personal disappointment. She had to balance emotion with calculation, hurt with strategy, and personal identity with public perception. Yet, despite all her experience, all her foresight, Meghan could not fully anticipate the human element, the emotional weight, the shock, and the ripple effects of Harry's decisive action. Each move he made, each legal step, each message, and each public statement carried a potency that she had underestimated. And as the hours unfolded, Meghan began to realize that she was no longer merely reacting to an isolated action. She was being drawn into a larger, historical drama, one that intertwined love, loyalty, legacy, and public scrutiny in a way that few could ever navigate successfully. The first signs of response were subtle, a message here, a hint of movement there. But even subtlety in this context could be amplified. Every word could become headline news. Every hesitation could be misinterpreted, and every private action could be spun into a narrative that neither party fully controlled. Meghan began to understand that the consequences of Harry's actions were not limited to their personal relationship. They extended into public perception, royal protocol, and media narratives, all of which had the power to shape her life and legacy indefinitely. And as the day drew on, Meghan faced a stark reality. The private world she had inhabited, one of careful appearances, calculated moves, and curated narratives, was colliding violently with a revelation that demanded immediate adaptation. The decisions she made now, and the countermoves she prepared, would define the next chapter of her life. Every step had to be precise, every response calculated, and every emotion controlled. Yet all the while, the personal pain of betrayal simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. But just as Meghan began to formulate her response, a subtle, almost imperceptible sign indicated that the next move in this drama would not come from her. The dominoes Harry had set in motion were already beginning to fall, and the consequences would reach further, faster, and more unpredictably than anyone could have imagined. Her reaction, her strategy, her emotions, all were secondary to what was coming next. And one moment, one decision, one revelation would completely upend everything she thought she controlled. The news reached the royal family like a thunderclap. echoing through the palace corridors with the force of a bombshell that no one could ignore. For generations, the monarchy had prided itself on stability, tradition, and control over narratives. Yet here was a crisis that threatened all three. Prince Harry, a figure of immense public interest and global attention, had initiated the severance of all ties with Meghan Markle, effectively declaring the collapse of a union that had long been the focus of media obsession. And suddenly, the royal household was thrust into a state of unprecedented turmoil. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors scrambled to piece together the timeline, attempting to understand the magnitude of Harry's actions. Every staff member, from legal counsel to communications teams, recognized that this was not just a marital dispute. It was a matter of historical significance. How often does a senior royal, a grandson of the monarch, decide to sever all personal, legal, and symbolic ties with his spouse in the middle of the night? Never, or at least not in living memory. The implications were staggering. King Charles, Queen Consort, and Prince William convened an emergency meeting in one of the palace's private chambers. The air was thick with tension, the kind of tension that fills a room when history is unfolding in real time. Every face reflected a mix of disbelief, concern, and strategic calculation. They understood that the public perception of the monarchy hung delicately in the balance, and one wrong word, one poorly timed statement, could amplify what was already a monumental scandal. For Prince William, the situation was particularly complex. He had spent years managing the expectations of a monarchy under global scrutiny, balancing family loyalty with public duty. And now, with Harry's decisive action, William had to navigate a minefield of family dynamics, media speculation, and public expectation, all while managing his own emotions and ensuring the integrity of the institution he had been raised to protect. The advisors presented the sequence of events to the king and his immediate family. Each detail, the private call, the legal mobilization, the planned severance, was dissected with precision. They discussed the potential public fallout, the media frenzy, and the possible repercussions on diplomatic and charitable engagements. Every angle was considered, every contingency planned, and every word weighed for its potential impact. Yet despite their meticulous planning, there was an emotional reality that could not be ignored. The royal family was dealing not only with a public spectacle, but with a deeply personal rupture. Harry's actions were not abstract. They were directed, intentional, and irreversible. For the monarch and his family, the crisis was as much about managing grief, disappointment, and shock as it was about public messaging or legal maneuvering. Meanwhile, within the palace, whispers spread quickly. Staff members who had served the family for decades shared concerned glances, knowing that what was happening behind closed doors would soon become public knowledge. The tension was palpable, a mix of fear, curiosity, and loyalty that reflected the gravity of the situation. Everyone knew that once the news reached the press, the narrative would be shaped by speculation, conjecture, and sensationalism. And the family understood that public perception could have a lasting impact, influencing everything from royal engagements to charitable initiatives. The conversations were intense. What could be done to manage the optics? How could they frame Harry's actions without appearing unsympathetic, yet maintain the dignity of the monarchy? Advisors suggested multiple strategies, from issuing carefully worded statements to controlling the flow of information to journalists. Every word was debated, every sentence scrutinized. They were acutely aware that a single misstep could transform an already volatile situation into a full-blown crisis. Yet even as they strategized, the human element could not be contained. Behind the polished protocols, ceremonial titles, and historical gravitas, the family was facing a deeply personal crisis. Emotions ran high. Disbelief gave way to anger, frustration, and confusion. Memories of family gatherings, private conversations, and shared moments with Harry flooded their minds. How could a single revelation, a single decision, destabilize a family that had survived centuries of political upheaval, war, and public scrutiny? And then there was Meghan. The royal family was acutely aware that her response would influence the unfolding narrative. Would she react publicly, privately, or strategically? How would her advisors, public statements, and media appearances amplify or mitigate the situation? Every potential reaction had been considered, every possible scenario analyzed, yet none could fully account for human unpredictability. Meghan had proven herself capable of controlling narratives and influencing public perception, and her next move would be pivotal. For Harry, the family's turmoil was both a consequence and a complication. He had anticipated shock, yes, but he could not have fully predicted the ripple effects through the royal household. Each reaction, each conversation, each decision made behind closed doors added another layer of complexity. And with the media already sensing a major story, every private discussion carried the potential to leak, to escalate, and to shape global headlines in unpredictable ways. As the hours passed, the palace attempted to regain a semblance of control. Statements were drafted, communications planned, and emergency protocols reviewed. The royal family understood the stakes. This was not merely a marital matter. It was a historic event with implications for public trust, institutional integrity, and global perception. The world was watching, and the family had to navigate both the emotional and strategic dimensions simultaneously. And yet, amid all the strategic calculation, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. Nothing could truly prepare them for the fallout. The emotional weight of Harry's decision, combined with the media frenzy and Meghan's likely response, meant that the next moves would unfold in real time, with consequences that could not be reversed. The palace was navigating uncharted territory, and every decision carried historical significance. The first domino had fallen, and the ripple effect was undeniable. Private conversations, carefully guarded secrets, and decades of protocol were suddenly at risk of being exposed, distorted, or weaponized. The royal family, despite its centuries of experience, was facing a situation that challenged both its emotional resilience and strategic acumen. And then, as the family prepared for the inevitable public scrutiny, a startling development arrived. A leak, subtle but undeniable, indicated that the story was about to break in the media sooner than anticipated. Every carefully constructed plan, every draft statement, every strategy meeting could be rendered obsolete by one unexpected revelation. The palace realized, with a mixture of dread and urgency, that the storm had only just begun, and that Harry's actions had set in motion a series of events that could not be contained. The royal family was in turmoil, but they were only the beginning, because what was coming next would go beyond titles, protocols, and private grievances. It would touch the global stage, captivate millions, and redefine the narrative of one of the most famous families in the world. The moment Harry's legal move became known, the media descended like a hurricane. Headlines exploded across newspapers, digital outlets, and social media platforms worldwide. Prince Harry splits from Meghan Markle. Royal shockwaves across the globe. Duke takes drastic step, severing ties with wife. Royal marriage in crisis. Each title, each post, each share was more than information. It was amplification, magnifying the scandal in a way that no private palace conversation could contain. It started subtly, with rumors leaking through unnamed sources, insiders hinting at tension, advisors dropping vague statements, and palace aides trying desperately to control the narrative. But subtlety in this case was impossible. The public's appetite for royal drama is insatiable, and once the first sparks hit the media, the fire spread faster than anyone could contain. Within hours, global audiences were inundated with speculation, analysis, and commentary. Television news anchors spoke with urgency, newspapers raced to publish breaking updates, and social media algorithms propelled every story to millions of viewers worldwide. The frenzy was immediate and relentless. Every detail was dissected: the timing of Harry's actions, the possible reasons behind the severance, Meghan's likely response, and what this meant for the monarchy. Commentators offered predictions ranging from sympathetic analyses to damning judgments. Every angle, no matter how speculative, became fodder for the global stage. People didn't just read the news, they debated it, tweeted about it, and shared it with a fervor that amplified the intensity of the situation. Harry, despite his awareness of public scrutiny, could not have fully anticipated the velocity and intensity of the media reaction. Every outlet, from tabloids to elite publications, sought the next piece of information, the next revelation, the next quote. The palace's carefully constructed veil of discretion was ripped apart, exposing not just Harry and Meghan, but the broader dynamics of the royal household to relentless public gaze. And Meghan? She was immediately at the center of the storm. Stories about her supposed reactions, private meetings, and statements, some verified, many speculative, spread faster than any official communication could clarify. Public narratives formed within hours, shaping perception in ways that were entirely out of her control. Every action she took was scrutinized, analyzed, and often misrepresented. The frenzy created its own reality, a world in which truth and perception intertwined in complex and sometimes dangerous ways. The global nature of the media frenzy amplified every nuance. British tabloids reported with near feverish intensity. American outlets offered dramatic interpretations, and international media framed the situation with perspectives influenced by culture, politics, and curiosity. Social media was particularly merciless. Every tweet, Instagram post, and TikTok clip became a microcosm of public opinion. Memes were created within minutes. Hashtags trended worldwide, and even influencers became unwitting commentators on the unfolding crisis. For the royal family, the pace was unrelenting. Statements had to be prepared, advisors coordinated responses, and damage control strategies were deployed at every level. Every phrase had to be scrutinized, every detail reviewed, and every message timed with precision. Yet, despite meticulous planning, controlling the narrative was near impossible. In an era where news travels faster than the speed of thought, the palace could react, but it could not dictate the story. Harry, meanwhile, had to navigate not just personal upheaval but the reality that the world was watching every decision. His legal action had ignited a spectacle that went far beyond his private intentions. Headlines and social commentary influenced how the public interpreted his motives, Meghan's responses, and the broader family dynamics. Every statement, whether from his team or the palace, was magnified, dissected, and debated. The emotional stakes were now compounded by global attention. The frenzy was not only about scandal. It was about narrative control, public sympathy, and historical framing. Media outlets, hungry for clicks and engagement, constructed interpretations that often contradicted one another. Some portrayed Harry as decisive and principled. Others suggested impulsiveness and emotional recklessness. Meghan was alternately framed as victim, strategist, or manipulator, depending on the publication and perspective. And the monarchy itself, usually seen as stoic and insulated, was suddenly humanized, exposed, and vulnerable in ways that captivated the world. For the public, the frenzy offered a sense of immediacy, intimacy, and emotional connection. Millions tuned in to follow updates in real time, discussing every rumor, leak, and revelation as if they were part of the unfolding drama themselves. Every misstep, every new development, and every official statement fueled anticipation for the next twist. The narrative had become not just about Harry and Meghan, but about power, loyalty, betrayal, and consequence. A story with universal appeal, amplified by celebrity, history, and human emotion. And amidst the chaos, there were whispers of deeper revelations yet to emerge. Insiders hinted at private conversations, confidential documents, and behind-the-scenes tensions that had not yet reached public view. Each leak, each tip, each subtle detail suggested that the story was far from complete, that the most shocking developments were still waiting to break. The media frenzy, relentless and omnipresent, was only a precursor to what was about to unfold. As the day turned into night, Harry watched the headlines with a mix of resolve and apprehension. He had taken action, mobilized his legal team, and initiated a process that could not be undone. Yet the intensity of public scrutiny, the unpredictability of Meghan's responses, and the global fascination with their personal lives added layers of complexity that even meticulous planning could not fully account for. Every move would be interpreted, every word analyzed, and every private action magnified in ways that could have unforeseen consequences. And the truth was, while the media frenzy consumed the world, Harry knew that the real challenges were still ahead. Headlines could spark curiosity, outrage, or sympathy, but they could not dictate outcomes. Legal consequences, family reactions, and private revelations awaited, all of which would add further twists to an already volatile situation. The global media storm was only the beginning, because as the frenzy escalated, one hidden truth, still unseen by the public, the family, and even Harry, was quietly preparing to surface. And when it did, the story would explode in a way no one could predict, changing everything yet again. Secrets from the past resurface. This chapter will be at least 2,000 words, continuing the dramatic exposé style with suspense, storytelling, emotional tension, and a cliffhanger ending. Even as the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, a more insidious storm began to stir, one that didn't rely on headlines, leaks, or social media. This storm came from the past. Secrets long buried, carefully guarded, and almost forgotten were quietly resurfacing, threatening to upend everything Harry and Meghan thought they knew about their lives, their marriage, and even their public personas. It began with whispers among advisors and aides, small remarks that hinted at inconsistencies, discrepancies, or events that had previously been swept under the rug. At first, Harry dismissed them. After all, the focus was already on the present, a shocking legal move, public perception, and Meghan's response. The past, he thought, was irrelevant. But whispers have a way of growing louder, of insisting on attention, until ignoring them is no longer an option. Soon, documents long considered private began circulating in controlled channels. Confidential correspondences, legal papers, and even personal notes revealed layers of information that, when combined, painted a startlingly different picture of past events. The meticulous care taken to maintain appearances was now undone, and patterns emerged that even Harry, with all his vigilance, had not fully recognized. Every revelation seemed designed to challenge assumptions, rewrite history, and inject new questions into a story already rife with drama. The past was no longer dormant. It was active, pressing, and impossible to ignore. Friends, former colleagues, and insiders came forward with accounts that contradicted previous narratives. Small details, once considered trivial or irrelevant, now carried explosive potential. Every statement Harry had believed, every gesture he had trusted, was now open to reinterpretation. The past, it seemed, had been quietly shaping the present, orchestrating consequences that were only now surfacing with devastating clarity. For Meghan, the resurfacing secrets were both a weapon and a vulnerability. Information that had been buried for years suddenly became relevant, influencing how the public, advisors, and even Harry himself perceived her. Some revelations cast doubt on her actions, intentions, or decisions. Others highlighted inconsistencies in narratives carefully constructed for public consumption. The impact was not only emotional but strategic, and Meghan had to decide how, or whether, to respond to these resurfacing truths. Harry, meanwhile, grappled with a growing sense of disbelief. How could events from years ago suddenly exert such influence over the present? How had so much been hidden, ignored, or misrepresented? Every new revelation added complexity to a situation already laden with legal, emotional, and public challenges. He realized that the present conflict could not be fully understood without confronting the layers of the past. Among the most striking revelations were instances that contradicted previously held beliefs about trust, loyalty, and intention. Moments once considered private and benign now appeared as carefully orchestrated manipulations or concealed actions. Emails, text messages, and private notes were scrutinized with fresh eyes, revealing subtleties that had previously gone unnoticed. It was a reminder that in high-profile lives, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. As Harry pieced together the resurfacing secrets, he noticed patterns emerging, patterns that suggested that certain behaviors, decisions, or communications had been intentionally masked. The depth of deception, or at least omission, was staggering. What had appeared as ordinary human error now seemed to indicate deliberate concealment, prompting Harry to question not only Meghan's motives, but also the broader narrative that had shaped his life for years. For the royal family, the resurfacing secrets added another layer of complexity. Advisors recognized that these revelations could shift public perception, complicate legal proceedings, and influence media narratives. Every historical detail now carried the potential to reignite controversy, challenge assumptions, and amplify scrutiny. The palace had long been adept at managing appearances, but this was different. This was history colliding with the present, creating a narrative that was unpredictable, volatile, and profoundly impactful. The resurfacing secrets also forced Harry and Meghan to confront their own roles in shaping the past. Every decision, every action, every omission was now under examination. What had been considered strategic choices were now scrutinized for hidden meaning, unintended consequences, and long-term implications. It was a reminder that in lives lived under intense scrutiny, the past is never truly gone. It lingers, influencing perception, narrative, and outcome in ways that can be both subtle and catastrophic. As the storm from the past collided with the ongoing legal and media crises, Harry realized that the narrative was no longer linear. Each revelation introduced new variables, new questions, and new uncertainties. The present was now inseparable from the past, and every action taken in response to Harry's legal move had to account for a cascade of historical context, emotional complexity, and public scrutiny. Even Meghan, despite her composure and strategic acumen, was forced to reckon with the resurfacing truths. Every decision she had made, every narrative she had constructed, and every public appearance was now open to reinterpretation. She had to navigate not only the present fallout, but also the echoes of past actions that were suddenly magnified under the global spotlight. And then, amidst the legal battles, media storms, and resurfacing secrets, Harry received a tip, a small, seemingly innocuous piece of information that hinted at a revelation even more shocking than anything that had come before. This was a secret hidden not just from the public, but from him as well. Its implications were vast, its consequences unpredictable, and its timing, coming in the midst of legal action and public scrutiny, could not have been worse. The discovery forced him to pause, to reconsider, to prepare for a new layer of complexity. The past had already rewritten the present once, but this new revelation threatened to do so again, in ways that no one could anticipate. Harry understood, with a chilling clarity, that the drama was far from over. Every step he had taken, every legal action he had initiated, and every strategic decision made by Meghan and the royal family would be reframed in the light of this emerging truth.